Our very first conversation, our first interview for this evening is, like I said, about climate change. It's important for us to have that talk now since the impact of Hurricane Melissa. And we have to talk about the role that climate change plays in these increasingly catastrophic weather events and what Jamaica is doing to play its part in. Can we even fight climate change at this point? Well, let's hear from environmental scientist and CEO of the Jamaica Environment Trust. Her name is Dr. Teresa Rodriguez Moody. Hi, Doc.
Hi, Kalila. Thank you so much for having me.
And welcome to Taking Stock. So there have been all of these conspiracy theories about how Hurricane Melissa was man-made, cloud seeding caused it, Andrew Holness caused it, Donald Trump caused it, all kinds of things. But what role would you say climate change actually played in getting Melissa to the intensification that it got to?
Okay, so that's a really good question, and I'm glad you framed how you framed it. Their studies have just actually been completed. The University of the West Indies Climate Studies Group worked alongside with another set of groups in I think it's in the UK, and what they have learned is that the intensity of Hurricane Melissa was definitely I don't want to use intensified again, but it was definitely increased by caused by climate change. So for your listeners, remember, climate change has to do with a change in weather patterns, long-term change in weather patterns. And a big part of that means that we have extremes, more extremes. So it gets hotter, we have more intense periods of rainfall, we have longer periods of drought, and also we have more intense storms. So this is what, when we think about climate change, we think about the extremes in weather. And what we saw with Hurricane Melissa, that rapid intensification, was definitely caused by climate change, fueled by the climate crisis. And I think the climate crisis is a much better word. The Caribbean Sea was 1.3 to 1.5 degrees Celsius hotter than it usually is. And because the water was not just hot at the surface, but hot at a great depth, when the hurricane was moving over the warm waters, churning up the waters, what normally happens is that as you go deeper in the water column, you tend to have cooler waters, which tends to slow down the intensification or ensure that a hurricane does not get too intense, too large. And what happened was that there was so much warm water that it just kept churning up all of this hot water and getting more intense. And so the rapid intensification over a course of a couple of hours, I think it was just 72 hours, where it went from a tropical storm to a Category 5 hurricane. The level of moisture that it had, the amount of rain that Jamaica alone had over the couple of days leading up, and in the 2 days of intense wind and rain, it was just definitely, the science has shown that it is definitely as a result of the climate crisis.
But I do wonder, is climate change, I don't want to say is it real, because clearly it's real. We're seeing the effects, we're seeing the warming of the ocean. But is it man-made or man-induced? And I ask this because the Earth over millions of years does go through cycles. We had an ice age millions of years ago, followed by warming events. So is it climate change just a natural part of what the Earth does every so often?
Well, you are correct that the planet Earth, we have gone through hot, warm, dry, wet, different periods in our history, and the records show it. But what the records have shown also is that the warming period that we are currently in is significantly greater than any other warming period in our history. And it is directly correlated to the man-made activities, primarily the burning of fossil fuel. And so what we tend to say is that the climate crisis, and I'm shifting away from climate change and calling it the climate crisis, because that's exactly what it is. Jamaica was not the only country to have been affected. Look at what happened in other countries in Asia, in Philippines. We saw back-to-back massive storms, and these kind of storms are going to become more of the norm if we don't make a change. And it is directly linked to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. And the fact is that the big polluters, the fossil fuel companies, they know of this correlation. They knew of this relationship, and what they instead did was kind of went to the denial, shifting of the conversation. So what we're trying to do now, um, in these conferences where we talk about climate change and all of these negotiations, is trying to find a way to reduce, phase out the use of fossil fuels so that we can limit how much the warming of the earth, which I don't know if some of you might have heard the statement 1.5 to stay alive. The fact is that science is showing that we're probably going to overshoot that target.
What does 1.5, what does the slogan mean?
1.5 to stay alive has to basically, we need to not exceed we need to ensure that the warming of the atmosphere does not exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius. But the projections are showing that if we don't make those changes, meaning if we don't urgently phase out fossil fuels, we're going to overshoot that target. And it's not just, remember, countries like Jamaica, our emissions, it's not to say dismiss them, but our emissions are nothing in comparison to the large economies like the United States, Europe, Canada, and so forth, China. And so what these negotiations are about at COP30, that's the conference of the party where all of these countries come together. It's happening right now in Brazil. They're coming to negotiate and say, listen, what's your plan? What's your target? How much are you phasing out by? What are you doing in your economy? Because us, Jamaica, little Jamaica, other small island developing states, other countries less developed like the Philippines and so forth, we are paying the price of your emissions. So, what are you going to do about it? And so it's definitely this crisis that we're faced with, these extreme weather events that every day are flooding our news timeline, is directly related to the burning of the fossil fuels. Yes, there are other things like our agricultural practices and deforestation, but the primary cause is related to the burning of fossil fuels.
I just posted a story today that renewables, for the first time ever, have overtaken coal as what is the single largest source of power this year. So there is a lot of progress being made. Interestingly, that progress is being made in a lot of the developing countries and the emerging economies. So you have China, India, Pakistan, Nigeria leading that push. Meanwhile, the United States and much of Europe is the reverse. So they're having less inputs from renewables, more input from fossil fuels.
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge, especially because the countries that you just listed in terms of the countries that are not, making that shift to renewables are some of the large emitters. And the large emitters are the ones that really need to dial back and make some urgent changes. And I heard this analogy recently. People tend to think of the climate crisis as a switch, that you turn on and off. And so I think it has to do with how scientists may speak, where, we didn't make our target. Throw our hands up in the air. I guess, we can't do anything now. But the fact is that, the analogy was like, it's more like a dial. And the fact is that there are things that we can do. We may not always get it the way to the extreme, but we can continue to turn the dial. And so the point of that is to say that all is not lost, and every degree of everything that we can do to cut our emissions, and that's where we talk about mitigation. So cutting back on and switching to renewables, moving to wind energy, solar, water, and so forth. Every switch, everything that we can do is very important in fighting this fight, which is the climate crisis.
Now, here in Jamaica, are we doing enough to get to our renewable energy target? I know we have an ambitious target to get to 50% of our electricity from renewables by 2030, which is only 5 years away. We are far from that target right now. The government insists that they're on track. I don't know. I'm skeptical about them meeting that target. Do you think we're going to meet it, and are we doing enough?
Um, I don't know. I really don't know if we're on track. I have seen the commitments, and we have to commend the government for these commitments, and I think it's important to aim high. But I think the reality is that we also have to be doing other things. So countries like Jamaica can't just afford to focus on mitigation. We have to focus on adaptation, and adaptation has to do with understanding that we're in the middle of a changing climate. So that means that what we grew up with, what our parents and grandparents grew up with, that's going to change. And what that means is that we have to do things differently. So, for example, if I tell you that storms like Hurricane Melissa are going to be more, I wouldn't say more frequent, but when you see your hurricanes, they're going to be more intense, right? So gone are the days that you're just going to say, oh, a category 1, category 2. When we see a hurricane, you'll see how quickly they intensify, and you'll see more intense hurricanes. So on the scale of 4 to 5 is where we're intended to see because of the warming of the seas. What does that tell us? Well, that tells us a couple of things: that we need to change how we build and where we build. And so it also might mean that, and so this is where adaptation comes into place. So how we build has to do with, well, if I'm in a flood prone area, then I either am not supposed to be building there at all, and that's about the where, or how we build could be, maybe I need to be making sure that all buildings in an area that may flood should be elevated to a particular point. Now, it's very hard to completely adapt to a category 5 hurricane. We're talking 185 mile per hour winds with higher gusts. That's the speed of, I think they said a Euro trail. I've never been. But they gave I saw some other examples, but it's extremely fast. A takeoff of a jet that's, going to take off into the air. That's about the speed at which they move. And so that's incredible force. And it's very difficult to build everything to be able to withstand that. But we do have to look at it. So critical facilities like your hospitals, we need to make sure that we don't locate them in certain zones. Don't locate them directly on the coastline. Don't locate them next to rivers. Elevate them. Change the type of roofs. We have to use science in our build back. When we talk about build back better, using climate smart choices, we have to use science to inform that going forward.
So Jamaica is going to be participating very soon. I think it's next week this week, the United Nations,
yeah,
the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Brazil. What are your main hopes for our participation? Who's representing us, by the way?
Sorry. Well, so this week we'll see a lot of negotiation taking place, and that's a very tedious process. And I think you'll have people from Climate Change Division. I believe that there's some folks from the University of West Indies. I don't really know who's the full team, but I just saw where Minister Samuda will be traveling to COP on Saturday to be a part of the discussions next week. So basically, I know that the government will be showcasing, I think, a bold green investment strategy. I think that was said, but this was an announcement made several months ago. So I don't know if things have changed. But I've also seen in a very recent news item today where they'll be going to ask for more money for Hurricane Melissa. But I think that one of the things that we're hoping for, Jamaica has just experienced a historical storm. It's one of the most intense hurricanes ever recorded in the Atlantic. Not just in the Atlantic, but to make landfall to make landfall, right? That's a big deal. And we need to ensure that our voice is very loud and clear when we go to negotiate, because we need to be talking about urging other countries, the big emitters, the big polluters, to phase out fossil fuel. Like, I mean, a lot of countries have come to our aid, and we appreciate that. But it's more than that we need, right? We need to be stopping the problem at source, which is phase out fossil fuels. We need to ask for more climate finance for adaptation and loss and damage. The fact is, we have to build back, but we have to build back. There's so much. I mean, you heard the prime minister said 6 to 7 billion at a preliminary US dollars, at a preliminary estimate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that we have not received that level of donations. Um,
Not even close.
not
That
even
is
close.
that is $1 trillion Jamaican dollars, and I need people to understand the context here. That is the equivalent of what the government spends in 1 year for the whole country in normal times.
Right.
So
And the
now we
thing,
have to find an extra trillion to deal
yeah.
with
And
this disaster.
the thing about it is that our hurricane season isn't over yet. And
Oh
even when
gosh.
it is over in the end of November, and I'm not saying this to scare people, but just to understand, Hurricane Maria and Irma were 2 weeks apart in 2017, and they were both
Oh,
category, I think, 4 and 5, or
don't
both
remind
category
us.
5 hurricanes. We have the hurricane season starts again in May
June.
of June. May. Is it May?
June to November.
Yes, I've got confused. Next year. So what happens when you have back-to-back type of storms? And I'm not saying that but this is the reality of the climate crisis. It is possible. So you build back, or you start the build back. There's no way we can build back in a few months. You
Mm-hmm.
start the build back, and then something happens, another climate event, whether it's a flood event or fire or drought. And those are slow onset things that can damage your food security issues as well, your
Yeah.
agricultural sector as well. These are real things that we have to grapple with. And so we have to be asking for money at the COP for adaptation financing as well as loss and damage.
So what can us ordinary people watching right now do? Is there anything we can do?
I mean, certainly, when I look at this, we have government. You can put them in three categories. We have government, which is like your enabling. They set the framework, they set the policy, legislation, they create that environment for investments and so forth. Then you have private sector, and then you have individuals. Now, individuals can make choices, but unfortunately, it really matters most when you have government and private sector. So, private sector in terms of the type of investments, how they invest, their whole, environmental footprint of a company, moving away from plastics, which is also fossil fuel, by the way. So there's a lot that each sector can do. And I'm not saying to your listeners that as an individual you can't do anything. Of course, you can switch to solar energy. You can make decisions to use less plastic, but it will be more significant when we have private sector and the government. Private sector definitely is key here. Private sector and government really making those changes across different levels.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your contribution this evening, Dr. Teresa Rodriguez Moody from the Jamaica Environment Trust. Jet, how can people follow Jet or get in touch with you?
Well, we're on our website, jamintrust.org, but we're also on Instagram, jamintrust1991, and also on Facebook.
All right. Thanks again, Doc.